Judge Thompson believed a fine would hush Pam Bondi. He never foresaw her shredding his reasoning before the entire room. The Tampa, Florida courthouse had hosted countless legal showdowns, but that morning, no one anticipated the tempest about to erupt. Pam Bondi, razor sharp as always, pushed through the solid wooden doors, briefcase in hand, the other tugging at her blazer's lapel. She'd come for what seemed a standard hearing, one she could navigate blindfolded. Before we continue, I have a small request for you. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and please complete our 1,000 subscribers for more inspiring stories. Now, let's go back to the video. Walking toward the defendant's table, she caught Judge Robert Thompson's stare. Known for his no-frills attitude, he wasn't focused on her face, but on a spot just below her collar, a plain gold cross. The courtroom's mood shifted, a stillness creeping in. Then, with a voice like a gavel's snap, Thompson cleared his throat and leaned closer. "Miss Bondi, I'll remind you religious emblems don't belong here." Pam didn't waver. "Your Honor, that cross," he cut in, "breaches this room's neutrality. Take it off or pay a fine." A soft hum stirred among the sparse onlookers. The bailiff fidgeted. The clerk's eyes darted from judge to Pam. Judges had flexed odd authority before, but finding an attorney over a necklace was uncharted. Pam stayed rooted. "Forgive me, Your Honor, but this cross is no different from a ring or a locket with a child's photo." Judge Thompson's face betrayed no emotion. "Not in my view," he sighed, sounding weary already. "Remove it, or I'll fine you for defying courtroom standards." In a career first, Pam Bondi faced a penalty, not for a misstep or rule breach, but for jewelry. The fine wasn't the core, its meaning was. She left the cross on, hands resting on her briefcase, her demeanor icy. She wouldn't let it drop. "Your Honor, I'd like to formally tackle this first." Thompson's brow lifted. "Tackle it?" "Yes," Pam said. "I'll lodge an objection and argue it on record." The judge smirked, eyeing the wall clock. "Miss Bondi, this is a business dispute hearing, not your personal soapbox." Pam held firm. "And I know the First Amendment doesn't pause for anyone's whims." That piqued his interest. He settled back, eyes tightening faintly. The court reporter's hands lingered over her keys. The room bristled, not over a contract clash, but because a veteran lawyer had just defied a judge outright. Pam knew the ledge she stood on, but retreat wasn't her style. "You're penalizing me for a cross. Shall we dissect that legally?" The judge exhaled, massaging his temples, but Pam was already digging into her briefcase before he could reply. She wasn't here to just debate. She'd unravel his shaky stance. Judge Thompson hadn't grasped the pit he'd begun carving. Pam slid a lone page from her briefcase, setting it gently before her. She moved slowly, each pause amplifying the room's strain. Thompson sighed again. "Miss Bondi, spare me the theatrics." Pam didn't blink. "I've no time for them either, Your Honor, but I've got constitutional law locked down." The judge leaned in, fingers clasped as if steeling himself. "You're fined for that cross, claiming it disrupts neutrality." "So, Your Honor, what precedent backs that?" Silence gripped the room. The reporter's fingers froze. The bailiff barely stirred. Thompson breathed out slowly. "This is my courtroom, Miss Bondi." Pam nodded. "It is, but it's not above the Constitution." She tapped her paper. "The First Amendment shields personal faith expression, especially when it's harmless to proceedings." The judge snorted. "You're a lawyer, not a lecturer." Pam's smile held no kindness. "Then let's dive into case law, shall we?" She lifted the page. "Tinker v. Des Moines, 1969. A ruling that says constitutional rights don't vanish inside public buildings, be it schools or courts." Thompson's jaw tensed subtly. He knew that case, as did every legal mind. Pam pressed on. "West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett, 1943. The Supreme Court held that forcing someone to ditch personal belief symbols violates their rights." She lowered the paper. "So, Your Honor, shall I continue, or will you rethink that fine?" The judge's fingers drummed his chair's arm. He was boxed in, he knew it, but pride held him back. "This isn't a faith debate, Miss Bondi." Pam cocked her head. "Then why'd you start one?" Gasps slipped from the crowd. Thompson's face shadowed. "Enough," he barked, but his grip was weakening. Pam leaned closer, voice even. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I'll stop when you give me a legal basis for this fine. I've yet to hear one. A heavy pause hung. At last, he glanced at the clerk. Note the fine is under review. Pam smirked. I'll call that a short-term win. But she wasn't finished. The true clash was just igniting. Thompson's expression stayed blank, though his shifting posture betrayed him. He'd expected submission, not a constitutional standoff. The courtroom's tension turned electric. Pam felt it. Every gaze locked on her, waiting. She'd staked her ground, leaving the judge two paths: cling to his flimsy stance and face disgrace, or retreat while salvaging control. But Thompson didn't yield easily. Miss Bondi, he said, voice steady, rules exist for order. If I permit one expression, I invite them all. Pam's lips thinned. Like the rings on half the lawyers here, or the pins you let officials wear? Thompson's jaw locked. Pam didn't relent. What about that defense attorney's pink ribbon for cancer awareness mid-trial? That didn't bother you. Murmurs rose among the watchers. Thompson glared their way, but the harm was done. Pam had bared his inconsistency. She leaned back, arms crossed. So, Your Honor, why's this rule just for my cross? Thompson's grip tightened on his desk. He was snared, and all saw it. He'd wielded an unspoken rule from bias, and it was collapsing. For once, he had no retort. Pam didn't crow. She let the quiet linger, letting the truth settle in. Then she struck the final chord. If you uphold this fine, Your Honor, I'll appeal before your ruling's dry. And trust me, this will hit the news. She paused. A judge fining a woman for a cross in court. The appeals courts would relish that case. Thompson's nostrils flared, pride warred with reason. Pam held his gaze. She let him stew. The longer he waited, the clearer his error grew. At last, he huffed sharply. The fine's withdrawn, he grumbled. Pam smiled. Thank you, Your Honor. But this wasn't merely about a fine now. She delivered a resounding statement, one Thompson wouldn't soon shake off. Yet, the aftermath was only starting. His words, the fine's withdrawn, should have closed it, but the courtroom had morphed into a stage. Everyone there had seen something unforgettable. The reporter kept typing, sensing this record would spread. The clerk, uneasy at the fine's start, now snuck an admiring peek at Pam. Thompson adjusted in his seat, shuffling papers, as if to wipe the slate clean. But Pam knew it wouldn't vanish. The silence roared. She smoothed her blazer, the tiny cross unmoved, right where it had been, all along. She triumphed, but she wanted more than a personal win. It had to resonate. She glanced at her client, a middle-aged entrepreneur tied to the day's real case. He offered a subtle nod, his trust in her swelling. Pam knew this transcended her now. Outside, word spread fast. A reporter covering another case nearby caught the scoop. Within an hour, a local site blared. Florida judge tries to fine lawyer over cross. It backfires. Pam's phone hummed repeatedly. Colleagues, old classmates, reporters, all clamored for details. But Pam didn't chase headlines or hype. She saw a larger goal, elevating this beyond a mere spat. She wasn't blind. Such cases rippled, intended or not. This wasn't just one judge versus one lawyer anymore. It was a test of an unmade precedent. Would other judges try this? Would lawyers that hide personal tokens to dodge fights? Could this spark pushes against courtroom neutrality that hit beliefs? Pam wouldn't allow it. By nightfall, the tale had legs. A noted legal voice on a conservative channel raised it in debate. Online, fierce arguments flared. Some backed the judge, others hailed Pam's stand for rights. She sat in her office, tracking it on her phone. A national news producer had called, seeking an interview. She sighed, rubbing her brow. She'd battled for clients in big cases for years, but this was distinct. It wasn't about business or crime. It was about freedom and whether a judge's fancy could snatch it. Yet Thompson wasn't through. She felt it leaving the courthouse, the look he'd shot her before slamming the gavel. He'd dropped the fine, but his eyes held a silent dare. Pam didn't know how it'd play out, but the fight wasn't done. She'd braced for some ripples, emails, maybe calls from peers. She hadn't expected the whirlwind's pace. Next morning, her assistant Sarah waited, brow furrowed, tablet in hand. "Look at this," she said. Pam scanned it. The Florida bar had spoken, cautious, neutral, but pointed. Judges can enforce courtroom decorum. Attorneys have expression rights, but must honor presiding judges' roles. We trust our system to handle this fairly. Pam exhaled. This wasn't idle chatter, it was a caution. Respect presiding judges' roles wasn't vague, it was a hint. The legal circle was tight. The bar rarely piped up unless a mess brewed. Thompson wasn't just sore, he was rallying support backstage. She set the tablet aside. This dropped today? Sarah nodded. An hour back. Pam wasn't shocked. Word flew in their world, and Thompson wasn't shrugging this off. Before she could speak, Sarah paused. There's more, she said softly. Pam looked up, face steady. Tell me. Sarah handed over a printed page. Pam skimmed it, pulse calm, mind whirring. Attorney Pamela Bondi acted disruptively, improperly defied judicial power, and showed conduct unfit for a court officer. Pam gave a dry chuckle. Unfit? She shook her head. That's bold. Sarah sighed. It's payback, plain as day. Pam reclined, fingers tapping her chair. Thompson didn't just want revenge, he aimed to warn others. He'd lost on his turf, so he'd wielded the system to reclaim dominance. This complaint flipped the script. He wasn't the overreaching judge, he was the wronged, and Pam the rogue, who dared him for kicks. She'd seen this ploy before. Make the accuser the villain, bury the truth in red tape. But she wouldn't let it stick. What's the next step? She asked, gears turning. Sarah breathed out. You've got 10 days to reply. If it proceeds, they'll review it formally. Pam nodded. Who runs that? Sarah faltered. A panel, judges and top lawyers. Pam nearly grinned. If Thompson thought he'd drown her in quiet pressure he'd misjudged, this wouldn't stay hushed. It was going public. Sarah watched her. What's your move? Pam inhaled, grabbing her phone. If Thompson wants a game, we'll play. She scrolled her contacts, plotting ahead. He expected a meek defense in a back room, a slap on the wrist. Then silence. He didn't know her. Pam thrived on the long haul, and now she'd ensure all eyes were on this. She acted fast. She knew retaliation thrived in shadows. Thompson wanted this muffled, leveraging the system, while the public stayed clueless. Not on her watch. She found her contact and dialed. After 2 rings, a voice picked up. Pam, I was about to reach you. Emily Carter, a seasoned legal journalist, had covered Pam's big wins and never shied from calling out judicial excess. Pam cut to it. Emily, hear me out. A judge filed a complaint against me for disrupting proceedings. Truth is, he fined me for a cross. Backed off when I pushed, and now he's hitting back through the system. Emily paused, then exhaled hard. A judge is targeting you for exposing his overreach? Pam smiled. Exactly. Emily jumped. I'm on it. Pam leaned in. Get it out before they twist it. Once it's public, he can't bury it as a minor issue. Emily was rolling. I'll air it tomorrow, with analysts who'll name it for what it is. Pam hung up, sensing the tide turning. But she wasn't stopping. She faced Sarah. Write a public statement. I want my stance clear before Thompson muddies it. Sarah nodded. Frame it as judicial excess? Pam shook her head. Frame it true, an assault on rights and power abuse. If he can punish me for standing up, think what he's done to the voiceless. Sarah's face set. It's done. Pam exhaled, rallying her thoughts. Thompson banked on quiet, but soon the nation would know his move. She didn't wait long. Next morning, over coffee, her phone buzzed endlessly. Emily's segment had hit overnight, and social media raged. Headlines screamed. Florida judge targets attorney over cross. Now he's in hot water. It wasn't just right-wing outlets. Legal minds, left, right, center, chimed in. A Georgetown constitutional expert trashed Thompson's stance on air, calling it groundless overreach. Another big-name lawyer tweeted a breakdown of Pam's stand against a risky precedent. Then came the big one. The Florida Judicial Review Board, citing media heat, would probe Thompson's actions for ethical breaches. Pam sank back, breathing out. This wasn't just her fight now. It was for every lawyer, defendant, anyone entering a courtroom wondering if a judge's pen could erase their rights. Sarah entered, phone up. See this? Pam hit play. Thompson stood outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, face rigid. His words were brief, too brief for defense. I've always guarded this courtroom's honor. My actions aimed for neutrality. I'll fully aid the review process. Pam nearly laughed. Neutrality? He was still clinging to that. Sarah crossed her arms. He's scrambling to look good. Pam nodded, and floundering. This wasn't fading. The review board had a call to make. A ruling against Thompson wouldn't just sting. It had set a shield for others like Pam. Even without a formal hit, he'd lost what counted. His standing, his clout, his sway. Every lawyer in his court would know. He tried to mute someone and failed. Pam sipped her coffee, glancing at Sarah. We won. Sarah grinned. Oh, I know. Pam set her mug down. She hadn't just fought for herself. She'd roared a truth. Never let power take your rights without a stand. Sometimes, one person holding firm shifts it all. Thank you for watching till the end video. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends too. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories.